Being a grown-up means that magic often disappears from the world. Like the elves in Tolkien's Middle-earth who diminish into rustic creatures of dell and cave. Bills, responsibilities, and failures can suck the will to be inspired. The photography filmmaking gear space can be a depressing pump-and-dump carousel of snake oil. Oh look, another camera, lens, light that's barely better than the predecessor we already sold you, but whose marketing will have you believing that you too can be the next Chris Nolan for the price of a down payment on a car, as if it'll come with an upload to the Matrix that will fill your skill tree of lighting, narrative, and visual intelligence. But gear does matter. If only because the wrong or inefficient tools can sure as hell get in the way and make for an unpleasant experience. There just comes a time when you're tired of compromising, tired of the workarounds and the adapters. You just want everything to work so you can pour all of your energy into creating the art.
Tilt shift lenses. A very niche product for a very niche select group of photographers within a very niche system of cameras. This is probably going to only apply to a very select few of you, but I hope that those of you who don't need these lenses, which will be most, can still find some interest and some fun in this video. Fuji did send me these lenses. I have to give them back, unfortunately, and unfortunately, they have my credit card, so I really do have to return them tomorrow, actually. But they don't get a say in this review. My opinions are my own. Who really needs a lens like this? And what does a lens like this even do? If you're an architectural photographer watching this, you already know. You probably already have something like this, which is by Canon 24mm tilt shift, and which has honestly been my biggest bang for my buck as far as investment goes when it comes to client work, because I would say 85 to 90% of my client images have been shot on this lens. I have gotten a lot of wear on these tires. And evolving into the GFX system, I didn't really have any options for tilt shift lenses. And the reason why, as an architectural photographer, I need one is because it allows me to get compositions that most of the time would be impossible to get with standard lenses. In addition to that, the shifting capabilities of the lens allow us to keep our verticals straight in camera, because instead of having to tilt the camera up when we need more space, we can simply shift the lens up and down without compromising our verticals, and that has a huge benefit because then we don't have to eat up resolution trying to fix it in post. I imagine most people that are shooting on a GFX medium format system are either high-end studio portrait photographers, landscape photographers, or architectural photographers demanding the absolute, no compromise, premium image quality, because let's be real, like I said in my actual review of the GFX, very few people actually need it. And even amongst the people who have this camera, very few photographers are gonna need lenses like this. Like Fuji's GFX lenses are absolutely incredible. The 32 to 64, the 55, all the other lenses, the optical performance combined with this sensor on those lenses is world class. Very few people are gonna need the very specific things that this lens does. And that being said, us architectural photographers who do shoot on the GFX line have been begging Fuji to make some native GFX mount lenses. And the reason for that is because many of us are adapting our Canon tilt shift lenses, which are excellent world-class lenses in their own right, but aren't particularly optimized to be adapted to a sensor of this magnitude. These are meant for 35mm sensors full frame, and obviously this sensor is much bigger, so there are compromises when you adapt a lens like this. The 24 specifically, because it is so wide, the image circle of the lens does not cover the full size of the sensor, so you get a lot of vignetting if you shift too far in either direction. Is that an absolute deal breaker? Have I ever failed to get a shot because of it? No, I haven't. but it does limit the functionality of the lens and you can't get the full effect of the shifting features. Having the 30mm Fuji lens, which is a 24mm equivalent, solves that issue. You can shift to your heart's content, and even at the very edges of the frame, you're gonna get excellent image quality, no vignetting, very minimal distortion, no imperfections as far as I could see. These lenses are absolutely world-class, perfectly manufactured. I can't find anything except one little quibble, which I'll get into later, but other than that, like, these are the Rolls Royce, man. Fuji really went all out. The reason why we've been begging Fuji to make lenses native to the GFX system is because, as I said earlier, of the compromises. I covered the shifting compromise. The other compromise with the 24mm is that it's just not as sharp as a native lens because it's not made for a sensor of this size, of this resolution. These are made for Canon sensors, which are much smaller. So when you put it on a GFX, you are going to noticeably notice a lack of sharpness or clarity. Is it absolutely terrible? No, it's not. Like, you can still get usable images, and I have shot client work on it. I've taken it on around the world, shot actual commercial campaigns with it. Nobody said anything. That said, though, when you slap on the 30, you're gonna notice absolutely zero compromise in image quality. It is tack sharp. The detail is phenomenal. On the 50mm Canon lens, which is actually my favorite lens ever made, I would be buried with this lens if it were up to me. The compromises are less noticeable. The sharpness on this lens is just significantly better. I actually find that this lens resolves very well. And the focal length reduction actually works to my benefit with this lens because it goes from a 50 to like a 38, 40, around there, which is a focal length that I prefer more than the 50. On the 24, that focal reduction on the GFX sensor becomes closer to a 17, which I find very wide for a lot of architectural work, and I often find myself having to crop in and post to get a composition that I actually want. So that's the other kind of drawback, and the benefits of having native tilt shift lenses for the GFX system is to have the proper focal lengths. Now, the interesting thing that I would consider is that normally when you upgrade your lens, you will sell your old gear to help compensate the cost of that. It makes total sense. I don't think I would do that with these lenses. I think I would keep the whole setup that I have here because now I have an entire canvas of focal lengths to choose from with my GFX tilt shift lineup. I have the 24, which, look, as much as I don't like the 17mm-esque field of view, it does come in very handy, especially in urban environments when you need to just get as far back as you can, and it's tough to fit the entire building in a frame, even with the shifting capabilities, even with the 4x3 sensor on the Fuji, which has a taller overall composition. Sometimes you still just need something wide, so I wouldn't get rid of this lens. And of course, the 50 gives me like a 40mm equivalent, which I freaking love for architectural photography. And I'm always looking for an excuse to use this lens anyway, so I'm not getting rid of this either. And of course, the 30mm is a lens that I would probably use for 85 to 90% of the shots that I take, and is likely going to be on my camera most of the time. So now I have an entire lineup of focal lengths to choose from. And when it comes to the 110, as I mentioned before, it's not a focal length I would likely use. And when you back up far enough, you don't really get the benefits of the shifting capabilities because at that point you can just use a standard zoom. You can tilt up and you're not really going to notice any kind of distortion with your verticals. So the benefits are, but not really necessary at that distance and at that length. I'd probably just use a standard zoom lens. So add to that the fact that it weighs a lot. I would say that the 110 is a niche for a niche for a niche for a niche. Like very, very, very few people are gonna need this lens. Those that do are gonna be very happy with it. Tilt shift lenses are not just for architectural photography. I actually found a lot of benefit using them for environmental portraiture. For the series of Fallout portraits that I'm working on, where I'm trying to incorporate as much of the environment as I can, they came in very handy for keeping the entire urban background behind me in this image that I'm going to show you here. And I was able to fit myself, obviously, and I didn't have to worry about, fixing verticals and posts. So it's not just for architectural photography. I actually use these tilt shift lenses a lot in portrait photography when I want a wider field of view. The other thing that I would use these lenses for is architectural filmmaking. And that is actually where I find one of the biggest downsides, because I've shot many architectural films with my Canon tilt shift lenses and been very happy with the results. But because of the GFX's video capabilities, they're not always the most practical, and that's not the lens's fault. It's just that the GFX, many of its video modes have a significant crop. So you're not really getting the benefit of the full medium format field of view. You end up having to crop, and you end up getting a closer to a full frame equivalent, which in many of these GFX modes, this actually becomes closer to like a 35mm lens, which is just not wide enough. And I found myself being frustrated at times because I would get a shot that I'm very happy with, a photograph, and then I would switch to video mode just to get a video clip, and then I'd realize that like half the frame has been chopped off and I'm in 16:9, and I have to move the camera back up and reframe my shot, which is kind of annoying. In a perfect world, the GFX system would have open gate. So Fuji, if you're listening, hint, hint, like if that's at all possible, make this thing open gate. That I know it's a massive sensor, so it might not be within the boundaries of physics, but if you've ever shot open gate on a camera, like on Fuji's XS20, for example, you'll understand that it's just like, it's so nice. It's the way to shoot video, and I wish every single camera that had video capabilities had the open gate option. Now, obviously, these lenses are manual focus. The only electronic components are for controlling your aperture. Is that a deal breaker? Not really, and the focus rings are very smooth, very precise, a pleasure to use. Nothing more to say about that, but something worth mentioning. One thing to make note of, and this is something that applies to all tilt shift lenses, not just these Fuji ones, is that they are not weather sealed, and that's probably quite obvious. It would probably be impossible to do that, given that you have to actually expose the lens to the elements. You're moving it in and out, and there's a lot of mechanical moving parts. Not a practical thing to ask, but still something to consider. So obviously be mindful about the environment that you would take a lens like this in. And that could impact your willingness to take this somewhere like Iceland, for example, where it rains a lot and it's very moist, and accidents can happen. The other thing to consider is that if you live in a humid area like I do, which is Miami, when you go outside after being acclimated to the air conditioner, your lens needs a period of adjustment, because if you've probably noticed, they tend to fog, and you have to let them breathe for a couple of minutes. And if you just try to shoot right away as soon as you get to your location, you're going to find yourself very frustrated as you're constantly wiping away condensation from the glass, and it's just kind of reappearing. Nothing you can do about that. You just have to let the lenses breathe. Now, with the tilt shift lenses, that negative impact is amplified because it also affects the back of the lens. Normally, when you attach a lens to the camera, the weather sealing protects the lens, the back of the lens, from having to suffer through that. With these lenses, since you are shifting and opening the lens to the elements, you're going to have to deal with condensation on the front and on the back, and getting it out of the back part of the lens is significantly more annoying. I wasn't expecting that. I should have known that off the top of my head, but when I first started shooting with these lenses outside, especially in the morning, I got very frustrated because I just kept getting blurry images, and I was like, wait a minute, the front of the lens is clear. What's going on here? I had to take the lens out of the camera. I had to wipe the back of it. I had to let it breathe. I had to give it the same amount of time. And so just be mindful. Don't be a dummy like me. Learn from my mistakes and be aware of that if you're going to take it somewhere where there's a lot of humidity. I think that's about everything there is to say about these lenses. Really, like tilt shift lenses, if you know you need them, you already know everything about them. And if you know you don't need them, there's really nothing more to say, to cover. And they make life a lot easier for those of us who really could benefit from their features. Really, the only question is a matter of budget. How much are you willing to spend to have these features, and do you really need them? Many real estate photographers probably get by using very wide lenses, 16mm zoom lenses, and just fixing their verticals in post. I know some architectural photographers that do as well. I know it's kind of blasphemous to think about that, but hey, we're running a business here, and it's just a matter of extracting the most value from your gear and padding your profit margins. So, do you really absolutely need these to run a business as an architectural photographer? No, but many of us opt for these lenses because they do make our lives easier. I know in many cases when your back is against the wall, quite literally, and you have nowhere else to move and you want a certain composition, having the ability to shift around can actually save your butt a couple of times, more than once in my case. So there are practical advantages to making the investment, but these lenses are very expensive. And if you're already investing in a GFX system, you're talking about going into like the cost of a car. So you really have to make sure that it's worth it. In my case, I would probably get the 30mm lens and keep my Canon lenses and be very happy with this setup. I probably wouldn't bother with the 110, and I will likely not wait very long before purchasing my own version of this lens because it really is that good. Well done, Fuji. As usual, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you found it useful, valuable, entertaining. And if you have any comments, questions, leave them below. Let's continue this conversation. Follow me on the socials, and see you next time.
All right, I'm done.